In the name of Jesus.
First of all, my camera isn't broken. It's meant to be in black and white, and you're meant to see the side of my head today. Let me just start my presentation here. Right, where are we? Right, is that showing up? Yeah, good. Okay, so I guess Simon contacted me a while ago and asked me to talk about neurodiversity. And there was a subtext to that about how can we include neurodiverse people in our community at Chapel. So I guess firstly to say a little bit about that, we need to think perhaps, well, what does the Bible tell us? Sorry. Where are we? So what does the Bible tell us specifically about neurodiversity? So I've spent a long time kind of looking into this. I've tried to kind of look at every angle I can think, and here is my considered conclusion. So is that it? Shall I get my coat? Shall I go now? Perhaps not. So if the Bible doesn't specifically mention neurodiversity itself, what can we take from the Bible that teaches us about neurodiversity? So I guess firstly, before we go on a bit, where do I fit in? So here's a couple of images of me. I'd certainly consider myself firmly in the neurodivergent camp. I guess personally I have sort of dyslexia myself, which is one of the things that would fit in that. But I guess we'll come on to defining neurodiversity a bit more later. But I certainly feel that some of the sort of social aspects of society I don't fit into quite as easily as others. I'm more at home tinkering and making something, or in an open space outdoors where I can see people coming half a mile away. It's not that I haven't felt welcomed at Chapel. I certainly have, but I guess I'm talking about that, but I'm also talking from the perspective of, as well as considering myself neurodivergent, there's probably several people in my family who would fit into that category as well. And for the last 6 years or so, I've worked exclusively as my kind of day job in autism, which is one of the categories of kind of neurodiversity. So I think if we look and we think about how neurodiversity could be considered and what other issues we as society and the church is trying to be inclusive of, I guess I wasn't quite aware of this, but the term neurodiversity was first used in 1998. And if we think that the church is still looking at how we can be more inclusive of sort of sexuality or race, we haven't quite got those right. It would be unusual if we'd by happenstance happen to get the inclusion of neurodiversity right by now. So neurodiversity, what is it and why is it relevant? So I guess the term neurodiversity can refer to variations in kind of the human brain function regarding sort of sociability, learning, attention, mood, and other sort of mental functions. And I guess to be neurodivergent is an essential form of human diversity. The idea that there is one normal or healthy type of brain or mind, or one correct or right style of neurocognitive function, is no more valid than the idea that there is one normal or right gender, race, or culture. And I guess within that kind of gamut of neurodiversity, that would include things like autism, ADHD, dyslexia, synesthesia. But I guess why the term was perhaps coined in the first place is because some people felt less comfortable with using those labels, those more kind of diagnostic terms. Some people find them helpful, some people don't. That's not perhaps what we're here to talk about today. So I guess I'll probably be focusing more on sort of autism as an example of neurodiversity and trying to think what we can do as a church community to welcome people who see themselves as fitting under that umbrella term. So let's hope this works. So I guess being neurodivergent is about being outside of the average. So the average would be somewhere in that middle kind of dark blue area on any variable. Being neurodivergent is about being outside of that. So society doesn't necessarily idolize the average. We don't have teenage average normal turtles for a cartoon for our kids to watch. That when we look at things that people are interested in, going to hold up on a pedestal in society, it's not necessarily the average, but then to be outside of that average is something that can leave people feeling kind of marginalized as well. So where do we go from there? So what might it feel like to be somebody who is neurodivergent? So here's a little video from the National Autistic Society, which will hopefully help us think a little bit about that.
We are all different, and that's wonderful. Some differences are easy to see. Height, hairstyle, gender, eye color, and so on. Other differences can't be seen. Our favorite foods, fears, or special skills. Interestingly, the way we see the world is also different. For instance, what do you see in this drawing? Most people see a duck, but some of you might have seen a rabbit. Whichever you saw, you are correct. This is just a trick drawing to show you that all brains work differently. The brain is your body's computer. It works differently for all of us and controls how you learn. That's why we are all good at different things. How you feel, which is why we all feel different emotions. And how you communicate. Sometimes the brain is connected in such a way it affects the senses and how we perceive and read situations and interactions. This is known as autism. Many people have autism, so it's likely you already know someone who is autistic. And for this reason, it's useful to know a little bit about autism. The special wiring inside an autistic brain can sometimes make the person good at tasks we may find difficult, such as mathematics, drawing, or music. It can also do the opposite, and activities we find too easy are incredibly difficult to them, such as making friends. The senses constantly send information to your brain about your surroundings and other people. However, when a person's brain and its senses don't communicate well, the brain can become overwhelmed and confused, affecting how they see the world. Picture yourself walking down the street. This is how an autistic brain may experience the same world. Scary, isn't it? Sadly, in many cases, the person can't say out loud how they feel. So even though there's chaos going on in their heads, they seem okay on the outside, unable to ask for help. We will develop behaviors to help us feel calm in uncomfortable situations. We may look away, hug ourselves, chew our fingernails, fidget, bite our lips, and so on. Equally, autistic people develop behaviors that help them cope with these intense moments. These actions may seem unusual, but they're just their way to feel calm. When they happen, it means they are having a hard time. The kind thing to do is not to give them an even harder time by getting cross, ignoring them, or mocking them. People with autism need friends who are willing to take the time to know them. With good communication and plenty of patience, everyone would be better off. People with autism are not ill or broken. They simply have a unique view of the world. And with a little support from their friends, they might just be able to share that view with us. Autism can make amazing things happen.
So I'm trying to think about kind of, if the Bible doesn't say anything specifically about neurodiversity, the term's really rather recent. What does it say? And what can we kind of think about to help us consider how we can welcome that group into our community? So I guess we hear that God doesn't look at people's outward appearance or even their outward actions. He looks at kind of their heart, their desires, what kind of, not just kind of the physical appearance, but kind of what drives their kind of behavior, their choices, their actions. But we don't see other people as God sees us. That kind of last song that we sang, Open the Eyes of Our Heart. I guess I would pray that also God would open the eyes of our hearts so that we can see other people that we seek to welcome as God sees them, not as we see them. So, in spite of our best efforts, how do we see other people? What are we kind of drawn to do when we see something that looks a bit different, that looks a bit out of the ordinary? I guess we have kind of sometimes an automatic sort of bias can creep in, and fear sometimes drives that. So, what's a good antidote to fear? Humor is a good antidote to fear. So, as we're doing this kind of via Zoom, it's going to be a little bit more rhetorical, but I'd like us to consider two different songs, one of which, if you're of a certain age, you'll probably remember. So I'm sure some of us have sung All Things Bright and Beautiful. I particularly like the Monty Python parody, All Things Dull and Ugly. So all things dull and ugly, all creatures short and squat, all things foul and dangerous, the Lord God made the lot. So I guess bright, beautiful, foul, dangerous, they're all judgments, and they're judgments that we can make and that we perhaps make without being aware that they are judgments that we can make. So you won't be able to answer this, but I'll just show you a couple of pictures next, and I'd like you to think for yourself, which one of these images is foul and dangerous? Which one is bright and beautiful, if you had to put them into a category? So we have a poisonous tree frog and a sports car. Visually similar? Have a think for a minute. Which category you would put those into? So, although we may think something is, I don't know, foul, dangerous, out of the ordinary, and that might be our kind of initial reaction, I think in order to welcome people, we need to look beyond that initial reaction to somebody's words, somebody's choices, somebody's actions, to what might kind of be behind that. That we need to look past our tendency as kind of fallen people to judge. And I guess this next video that I'm hoping to show is a bit about the impact that some of those unconscious and unintended judgments can have on some people, and how perhaps if we can modify those and or be aware of those and think about what we do about them, we can become more welcoming.
We're sorry to announce the train has been delayed. Please listen for further announcements. This train is diverted.
Sorry.
I'm autistic, and the fear of unexpected changes can make leaving the house impossible.
So I guess we have a tendency to judge, but we're called as Christians not to judge. we're called to look at our own lives, to look at the plank in our own eye before pointing out the speck in our brother's eye, where we're drawn to do it, but we know that it's something that God would prefer that we didn't do. So I guess a better understanding of perhaps what neurodiversity encompasses helps us to be aware of what some of those judgments might be. So I thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about sort of neurodiversity, disability, mental health, what some of the similarities and differences are between those. I guess disability is an incredibly broad topic, and we've covered that already in a few kind of previous sermons. And I guess disability can sometimes have an outward physical appearance. You can notice that somebody is different. Neurodiversity is, I suppose, about how somebody's brain is wired, and it's about how they are made, how they're kind of knitted together. It's part of who somebody is from when they were born. It's like an intrinsic part of who they are as a person. It's not possible to separate the dyslexia, the autism, the ADHD from that as a person if you ascribe those labels to people, if you feel those labels are helpful. And I guess with mental health, we obviously want to be inclusive of as many groups as we can, and we want to think about mental health as a community as well. And I guess mental health is something which happens to us through, to an extent, what goes on in our lives around us makes us more vulnerable to experiencing difficulties with our own mental health. And many people would choose to want to be relieved of the difficulties they feel because of the effects of mental ill health. With neurodiversity, what tends to happen is that because of who somebody is, because of how they're made, they might find certain tasks more challenging, they might think differently, they might behave differently. And it's more that the way society responds to that and treats them as an individual creates situations that they find challenging, that they find distressing. It's not necessarily that you would want to kind of change or to kind of cure somebody of whatever kind of neurodiverse experience they have, whereas some disabilities become an intrinsic part of who somebody is and they wouldn't want to change that. But for some people, if there was a way of changing something about who they were, they might choose to do that. The same with mental health. And I think that's where the difference comes in when we're thinking about neurodiversity. So thinking about how some aspects of the church have responded to that in the past. What neurodiversity isn't. Neurodiversity is not something that's wrong. It's not something that needs fixed. It's not demon possession. It doesn't need exercised. So I guess an example I came across was 2003, there was a report in a local paper of a young boy who was unfortunately died while people were trying to pray over him to cure his autism. That's certainly not the route we would necessarily want to take. So if we thought a bit about, well, what neurodiversity is, how can we think about Jesus's actions and Jesus's behavior in the Gospels? How can they inform how we would approach and join people? If we want to kind of follow Jesus and to be like him, how would we act? So I guess in this next short clip from Brené Brown, I'd like us to think about which character in this animation best resembles how Jesus would have acted. We think of that, say, Jesus coming alongside the leper that he meets when the rest of the people were standing back.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, you climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no. You want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with "at least." Yeah. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
So if we want to try and connect with people and make them feel safe and secure as part of our community, how can we do that? And that will be different for each individual. My picture today is quite different. I guess this is just talking about me personally, but I find looking at everybody's face on that big screen of everyone in Zoom a little bit harder than being in church as a personally, physically. So I've tended to listen back to rather than kind of watch at the time. So if I turn and I talk to you directly, and also for me personally, the color in everybody's screens, I find a little bit of a distraction. So for me personally, I would find kind of that view that you've seen so far, without the color, I would find that calmer to look at. That would let me focus more on what the speaker was saying. Now, that won't be the same for everybody. And I think what we also need to think of is...
So what is empathy? And why is it very different than sympathy?
How we can meet people as an individual, how we can show empathy like Jesus did when he met people like the leper. But not to presume that there's one archetype written in the Bible of how we can support people who are neurodivergent. I guess the very nature of the term implies that it is a very disparate group of people, and we will have to maybe be open to let people know that we are open for them to come to us, that we will sit beside them, that we will empathize with them as Jesus might have done, that we will listen to what's challenging for them, to what might work better for them. And I'd like to think about Carl Rogers, the founder of person-centered psychology. So he came from an almost puritanical, or at least very conservative Christian upbringing. He was training to go into the ministry. And at the end of that training, he changed his career path. He started to identify more with being an agnostic than a Christian. And he went to kind of follow psychology as a science. And he's written that people are just as wonderful as sunsets if you let them be. When I look at a sunset, I don't find myself saying, soften the oranges a bit on the right-hand corner. I don't try to control a sunset. I watch it with awe as it unfolds. So if somebody like him had been a member of Chapel A, would he have done that? Would he have swapped his faith for a more scientific pursuit? So I'm hoping that half an hour is a very short time to think about this. So I'm hoping that this is a way of us opening up a conversation. These are some ideas. These are some of my ideas. These will probably not fit with everybody. If other people have thoughts about how we can be more inclusive to this group, it would be wonderful to hear them. So I guess to conclude that we as neurodivergent people, we do not need fixed. We are not broken any more than all of humankind can be considered broken. What would help is to be noticed, for someone to sit with us and to listen. To listen to what would help each of us as a unique and individual expression of God's creation. We do need prayer, but not for healing, but for the strength to challenge and to change an intolerant world with the help of a community around us. And if you see someone acting differently, try not to judge. We are not incapable of feeling. We simply need time and understanding to allow us to express our emotions in our own unique way, in a space that doesn't make us feel overwhelmed. So thank you for being here today. And I'll leave you with a song that may help us think about the different ways in which we can express our love and our feelings. Thank you.